First of all, I want to thank the organizers of this event who put together a variety show with a human rights bent every time that I come to Toronto, which is an outstanding thing because you enjoy yourself and then you hear some very important messages. So I want to give them a round of applause. I will be taking you back to a moment in my own teenage years in Tehran. So bear with me while we take this journey together. Whenever the name hijab, the mandatory dress code that is forced upon Iranian women comes up, I have an immediate visceral reaction. There's a sudden churning in my belly, some irrational fear, discomfort, or both take over me. And no matter where I am, I go back to August 1984, an extremely hot day in Tehran. In those days, women's outerwear could only be black, brown, gray, or navy. All other colors were banned, and it was that on that particular day, it was Ramadan. So for those of you who travel to Iran, you know, all eateries, restaurants, and water fountains are all shut down. I missed my bus, so I had to walk to my destination. It was around 2 p.m., and the worst heat was beating down. I wanted water, but there was none to be found, so I hated feeling thirsty. The sun was blazing more than usual, or so it felt to me at that time, and under all that thick clothing, black scarf, the long Islamic uniform, the pants that went under, and my closed-toed shoes, in a weather that even the lightest of clothing would have been too much, I was boiling. Anger and heat were flowing from me in the form of sweat. I looked at the sky, and I cursed the sky. I hated the sun. I hated the bus that I missed. I hated the bus driver who saw me coming but did not wait. Everywhere on the walls, the murals were about the war, the one between Iran and Iraq, which began in 1980 and lasted for about a decade. There were slogans about martyrdom and how glorious it was, and the portraits of very hairy but smiling soldiers with a wing on each shoulder who had been martyred. At that moment, the only idea I did not hate was death. I thought that if Saddam Hussein came and bombed everything and everyone, including me, I'd not mind. As long as this version of my life, a life of prohibition, would end. I'd not mind dying if the things that I hated died with me too. Then I realized how gloomy and dark I had become, and at the end, I truly, truly hated that I was hating at all. And so I hated myself for having become that way. I was only 17. I wanted to be joyous, and hating was the last thing I wanted to do. It was impossible to be joyous. Our calendar did not have room for much joy. Every month we were commemorating someone's death or martyrdom. On their birthdays, not much happened. Music was banned, and so was dancing. But when they died, there was a lot to do. Grieving and mourning were what we had mastered to do. But that is what Iran did to us back then, and still. We were surrounded by death on the walls in speeches, and our demonstrations were all about death to this and death to that. And martyrdom was presented everywhere as the best thing one could do with one's life. We were so busy hating or dying that our minds had become too full than to focus on the actual business of living. In the West, in Canada, in the US, when we think about hate crimes, we think about a racist or anti-Semitic act. We think about skinheads and the Ku Klux Klan, and about torchings and shootings and lynchings. But what if acts of hate are not committed by an outlaw group, but an entire government which has written the hate into law? What if we live in a country where hate is peddled daily and taught in schools? Do we no longer consider these acts as hate crimes because people who are officially in power are committing those acts? I don't think so. When I look back on that particular day in Tehran and my own reaction and all the anger I had inside, I can't help but think that I too was a victim of hate. In school, on the streets, and in all the public places, including even places where one goes to be with nature, the park or the mountain, there were signs of hate everywhere. Hate and death. We Iranians who were born and raised in post-revolutionary Iran, who were not binational, who did not have the luxury of having a second passport in our chest pockets, are also victims of hate, and some of us far more than the others. And what makes our case much more unbelievable and bizarre is that the hate that was perpetrated against us was done so by our government, by the very leaders who were supposed to protect us. When friends look at my photographs of the time that I had first arrived in the US and compare it with my image now, they say that I looked older then in those photographs than I do now. Hate makes you age. Hate is emotional acid. It eats away at those who keep it inside. You might be thinking, this is 30 plus years ago. Why revisit all these gloomy memories now? Well, as content as I am today, and far from that life that I left behind, I believe that if we forget where we came from, we can't possibly know where we need to go. I, like so many sitting in this crowd, who are activists and believe that the Iranian regime must go and be replaced by a democratic order, believe that we must remember. But the overthrowing of a tyranny is a two-dimensional transformation. The first transformation is the obvious one. It happens inside the country, in Iran, as it did in 1979. A caste of leaders are forced out, a new one comes in, that we are all familiar with. But there's a more important overthrow, a second transformation that needs to happen, which we know far less about. This second, even more important than the first, and surely the only way that the success of a political overthrow can be guaranteed, needs to happen inside every single one of us. Like people who in the week leading to Nowruz meticulously go through their homes and do a thorough spring cleaning, sweep and dust every little corner to rid themselves of all the signs of dirt and darkness, we too have to do a thorough spring cleaning of our hearts and minds. We must look into ourselves and ask the most obvious question that we never want to ask. How did the hate affect me? How did all those years leave a trace on me? For me, it was only natural to see that in the midst of all that heat in that summer day, the thing that I was hating more than any other was myself. When a tyranny humiliates you on a daily basis, forces you to hide under the veil, silences your ideas and speeches, you shrink and shrink until you lose a sense of yourself. That is what I was back then. Not a full human, but a human drop. And once I had hated myself, it was much easier to hate others, to be suspicious, fearful, and mistrustful of them. When I arrived in the US and went to LA for the very first time, at every Iranian store or restaurant that I went to, I heard in my head the exact script that I had heard by the regime on radio and television. I would look at the Iranian customer sitting at the table next to me and think, These are the Taghoutis, the corrupt vermin of the old regime who are here. That is how the regime portrayed those Iranians in exile for the rest of us in Iran. I did not want to be identified with any of them at all. Then last year, an Iranian student who happened to be enrolled at the university where I teach, and whom I had helped through her first difficult months of adjustment in America, came to me and, with a look of guilt on her face, said, "I have a confession to make. I was afraid of you in the beginning because I thought you worked for the Mossad. But I don't think that anymore." For 40 years, hate has divided us. It has divided us from each other. All of us are suspicious of the others because the lines that we have been fed for so long continue to run in our minds. Some of us are Taghouti, others are agents of Mossad, the CIA, the MI6, or sometimes all of them at the same time. And if that doesn't fly, then we are reformists who cannot be trusted or are agents of the regime itself. While I'm not naive enough to know that there are actual elements of the Islamic Republic who have infiltrated our communities in the US and Canada, I also believe that we must make every effort to talk to each other. We must find a way of re-establishing the bonds that we have lost as a result of 40 years of being poisoned by divisive rhetoric. This division occurred in a very calculated fashion and in stages. First, we were separated from our bodies. Our physical beings either had to be hidden, or if they were prized, it was only prized as corpses in death. Second, we were separated from the physical world. Nothing in this world was worth hanging on to. There was another life, a better life elsewhere. This life was only superficial, material life. The deeper, better life was somewhere higher in another dimension. So we were divided from this physical world too. Third, we were separated from each other. We were no longer referred to as a nation, but as an ummat, as in believers. Our bond was no longer shared, the shared passion for a common homeland, but a love for a global faith. So suddenly, we went from being Iranians into tiny groups bonded by religion, ethnicity, or political affiliation. And all of us grew afraid and suspicious of the other. Now, every morning I wake up and I ask myself, how can I be what our greatest national poet, Ahmad Shamlou, once elegantly articulated? Ablaha marda, man aduy tu nistam, enkar tuam. How can I not merely be against the government I do not respect, but instead lead an existence so against their values that I deny them of everything that they ever tried to inculcate in me? So these are the things I do. Number one, I go to the gym. Not because I like going to the gym, in fact, I hate going to the gym, but because I know that I must restore the respect and the approval I lost for my physical self. Number two, I make sure not to take the material world for granted. I try to observe, watch, appreciate the life around me. I, for instance, try to even learn the name of all the birds that I used to identify only as gonjesh, sparrow, and kabutar, as in pigeon. And now I realize that there are so many different species, all of which, even the tiniest ones, have a name. And that this is an example of all the beautiful things in this world that I wish to experience. Number three, I remind myself that I must continue to move from the victim that I once was to a citizen. A citizen has what a victim does not have. A citizen has a strong sense of identity and self-worth. The victim romanticizes death and martyrdom and does not think much of herself. The citizen
respects herself, and as such, respects others, and thinks about how much she can get to what she needs to do to get to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Number 4, I try to listen to my emotions, but not be ruled by them. When I was a victim, my emotions were always being manipulated by the authorities, and I rarely got a chance to think straight. My emotions, whether anger, sadness, were all the tools of a regime that filmed my emotions and made television commercials with them. As a citizen, I do my best to let my mind and my thinking be in charge of my activism and the ideas that I articulate. Number 5, I refuse to call my fellow Iranians by hateful terms. I do not allow rumors and gossip to get in the way of dialoguing with my compatriots. I disagree with them often, but I will not participate in spewing or perpetuating negativity. And with the ones I like and admire, I make sure to ask a very important question. What can I do to help you? Number 6, I make sure not to lie. When I was a victim, I lied because then lying was an act of resistance. But as a citizen, I tell only the truth because it is the only way that I can have dignity and self-respect. Number 7, I refuse to be silent. As a victim, I was silent. As a citizen, I speak up. I especially speak up when others tell me not to say something about the atrocities that go on in Iran. They tell me that a good patriot should not embarrass her country. To all of them I say, I am doing my very best to cause embarrassment to the people who have shamed my country. And I feel patriotic when I do that. To be patriotic, to be a true citizen, is to speak up, which is what I've tried to do this evening. And thank you for listening.